Welcome. Welcome to Insights Equestrium and our exciting discussion today, M&A, mergers and acquisitions in product management in the tech industry. I'm Pete Howard, Professor of Practice and Executive Director of the Digital Business Institute here at the Equestrian School of Business at Boston University. I'm excited to bring together our panel today for a lively, interactive discussion on this very important topic. First, housekeeping. We'd love to have an active Q&A today with all of you. So here's how it will work. If you're online, there should be a Zoom link for questions. Hopefully you see it. Not use the chat box, but hopefully you see the Zoom link for questions. And in person, we have a QR code that you can scan to enter questions that will appear on my handy iPad we can go through. Or if you're in person, you can ask live questions as well too. We'll have a mic for that. Okay. So with me today are two experts in the field of M&A and product management, Haseeb Jawad, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Lilac Schoenbeck, VP of Strategic Initiatives, both from Rocket Software. Welcome. So I think our audience would love to start by hearing your backgrounds. Everybody here are students and thinking about next steps. So would you mind giving us a little bit of your background? Haseeb, we can start with you.
Sure. Well, again, my name is Haseeb Jawad, and I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives team at a company called Rocket Software. I know as soon as I mention that name, people say that, yeah, we have listened to your ads, and I always tell them that, no, we're not the Rocket Mortgage that you're aware of. I know that because I've tried to get friends and family discount with them, and they told me that that's not how it works. In Strategic Initiatives team, we have been working on some of the strategic initiatives, starting from determining the corporate strategy of the company to working on different acquisition projects and doing due diligence, and then getting involved on the integration side. So I'm personally leading integration for a couple of companies and that we have just recently acquired. Before my experience in strategic initiatives, I was leading the business unit operations team for one of our business units. And before that, I was doing product management for Rocket. I've had M&A experience before in my previous company called Carbonite. And I'm also an MS MBA graduate of class of 2014 from here at Equestrian School of Business. So I've been sitting here exactly on the same chair, listening to the guest speakers and thinking that they may have a secret of life to share with all of us. But that's not, that's not why we are here for. So we'll talk about acquisition, we'll talk about integration. Looking forward to chatting more, and maybe I'll hand it over to you, Lilac. You can also maybe tell us about what Rocket Software does, because I seriously don't know why we don't make software for rockets.
No, we don't. Not even a single blessed bit of rocket software is being made. My name is Lilac Schoenbeck. I did not go to Equestrium. I'm a Sloan grad from 03, so a long, long time ago. But I do remember sitting in rooms like this. And I am now leading strategic initiatives, which, as Haseeb said, is a lot of M&A and strategic planning and integration at Rocket. My background, though, is a little bit different. I spent a few years in product management, leading a portfolio of a $150 million portfolio. And then before then, Haseeb and I both were at Carbonite together. So we travel in packs. And I actually have about 20 years of product marketing and product management background. So my pivot to M&A was an intentional and late-breaking one.
Well, great background. Thank you. So obviously the right people for this conversation. So to ground us, simple question, but I'm sure it's very complex. What is M&A and why do we do it?
I can start. So M&A, mergers and acquisition. It's very similar to, I would say, a home buying process, or let's make it even simpler, buying an iPhone. So you are looking for a new phone. Maybe you have an older version of iPhone and you want to upgrade technology and you look for the newer version. Or maybe you are an Android user and you want to transform and go to another platform. Or maybe you want to transform entirely and you are a Nokia 3310 phone user and you want to enter the world of an iPhone. So you look at different options that are available. You maybe want to get a new Apple Watch and other accessories that could come with an iPhone. And for different reasons, you do that. So you decide, and then you go to the Apple store, and then you talk to the salesperson. There's a conversation. You are basically looking at different features and compatibility. So you're doing your diligence, and eventually you decide that you're going to buy it. So you sign the terms and conditions, and then you buy the new phone. And then it comes that you are basically transitioning or transferring your data and information from an old phone to a new one. So M&A in a technology company is, I would say, very similar, that you start with looking at different options, different companies in your industry. Where are the technology gaps in your organization, where the product gaps are? So you will look for different rationales for an acquisition. Maybe it's a customer acquisition, that you are interested in another company's customers and you want to move them to your own platform. Maybe there is a technology gap, as we mentioned, or in some cases you want to transform entirely. You are in a cloud storage and backup company, and you are looking for a cybersecurity company. So those are all different reasons why we look at M&A, but it's very similar in terms of looking at those options, doing your diligence, and then eventually signing and closing the deal.
Anything to add, Lilac, in the last couple of weeks?
No, I think that's right. And like Haseeb said, it's motivated by expanding your market, growing your revenue, filling in gaps. There's a lot of different motivators, and those motivators then impact what you're looking for in a solution, right? And what to buy, like the magnitude, the location, the technology, the customer base, the revenue, right? There's a lot of different factors that come into play, but it almost always starts with, what am I trying to achieve here?
So you mentioned gaps, fascinating. So that brings me to the question of a product or a company roadmap. Do you have an existing roadmap that would pre-identify gaps, and you proactively go out and find those? Or is it more opportunistic when you find an opportunity that could enhance your roadmap?
That's interesting. It's sort of both. Because when you're looking at a set of acquisitions, if you have a product, I'm sure you guys have seen product roadmaps, they aspirationally hope that you know what's going to happen in 3 years. They lie, but that's the truth. And then you think to yourself, well, if only we did shredding in addition to slicing, we could capitalize on more in the market. And then you'd go send your corp dev team out to go find shredding companies, right? And that would be, from a roadmap perspective, something you'd call almost a tuck-in. It depends on the size of the acquisition, but basically you're saying, I'm going to take it, I'm going to fold it into my greater story, and we'll sell a broader set of things to the same set of customers. And that is a product management and roadmap driven hunt. On the other hand, there's also these more transformational transactions. Like if you're buying something that's close to your size or close to a third of your size, that can actually fundamentally change the company. It doesn't always manifest as a gap on your roadmap because you're not thinking that big on your roadmap. And so those are often adjacencies. So we do cutting and chopping, and I'm going to get into like the blending business, right? And that's separate. I can go buy a whole adjacency, and that doesn't tend to manifest as a gap on your roadmap so much as just an adjacent market position. And with those in particular, I mean, there's always the question of the opportunism that I want to draw on. Some of this stuff comes to you because somebody wants to sell themselves. All of you who think you're going to be startup people, that should come to you soon in your minds, right? If I want to sell myself, then I might come and shop the company to different people, and that's opportunistic. And then there's other situations where you knock on someone's door and say, company's awfully cute, can we talk a little bit more? And then that's a sort of outreach and outbound activity, right? So it goes both ways.
So something like maybe, existing company customers, existing products, new products or features, new customers, which is your more innovative type approach with new products.
Yeah, that's right.
So you mentioned a little bit about assessing M&A targets, but let's go into that a little bit more. Is there a specific process, or, again, you have your roadmap, you have the gaps we talked about, you're part of that, but what else do you do to assess an M&A target?
Oh, go on.
So I think there are many ways to looking at it. Like Lilac was just talking about different rationale for an acquisition. So identifying why we are doing it, if it's a technology gap that you are filling, or other customer consolidation or a transformational deal. So based on that, I think there are different criteria to actually assess it. But you look at other companies that have been recently acquired. You look at the comparables that can actually tell us what's the general purchase price for such an acquisition in the market. You also look at the value that is going to generate for you in the future. So there is, of course, the company is going to come with a revenue stream, but maybe the two companies together are going to create more revenue synergies and opportunities. So how valuable that is going to be for us. And then, of course, there is an expectation from the seller that they expect that it's going to be at a certain price point. So that's from a purchase price or a pricing perspective. But in terms of just assessing what the ideal target would be, again, it goes with your corporate strategy, what and why you are doing this, and then which company falls in that criteria. So if there is a checklist of things that we want to achieve, we want to fill the product gap, and we want to have the right skill set that is available, or the resources that come with the acquisition. And all of those things, I think, is making sure that we are achieving the value drivers that we wanted to achieve through the acquisition.
So back to product management. If you're a product manager, like many of our audience hopes to be or are, how does that affect you? If you're managing a product and let's say there's an acquisition target coming that might be, would it be a bolt-on to your product? Would it be an adjacency, or how would that work?
Well, acquisitions essentially throw a curveball in your life. You want to believe, we all want to believe, that we would know at the earliest moment that an acquisition was being pursued. I'm going to tell you that's probably not true for anybody but the person on the corp dev team, because these things are highly confidential. And honestly, the failure rate is super high. This would be like every time you hearted somebody on a dating app, like you were going to send an update to everybody in the class. Like, you're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. We are not going to communicate until we've at least gone out on a first date, right? Like, it doesn't even make sense. So most of the people in the product teams and product managers are working on their day-to-day jobs. And one bright day, somebody shows up and says, guess what, Sven? We've got a potential acquisition coming. Now, then there's a question of, firstly, my schedule is completely blown up. Like, that day it's over. Like, it's all over for the next 3 weeks. And you're going into a process called diligence. And typically a product leader will be part of the diligence process, because a product leader understands your roadmap, understands the gaps in your roadmap, and understands the questions that you might ask about their product, their customer base, their market, to understand the synergies and how these pieces would come together. Diligence happens on its own schedule. Diligence does not care what you have in your life at all. So that next day, it's all over, right? Like, Haseeb and I weren't even sure. I wasn't sure I was going to be here at this time because I have a diligence meeting, and nobody's going to change that for me. They don't care. And so you go in and you're asking a bunch of questions of the target. And as a product leader, you're beginning to assess, how does this come together? Can I sell more if I have this? Are these the same customers that are mine, or is this adding customers? Could I cross-sell into this space? You're responsible for answering and developing a hypothesis, which ultimately is going to drive the business case. Because if you tell me I can double my sales if we have this thing, I'm going to pay more for the target. And if you tell me it's not incrementally going to increase my revenue, I'm going to pay less for the target. So this is a critical role.
Yep.
Now, perhaps the most disappointing part about M&A is that the whole thing can die after you've spent 3 weeks living and breathing their diligence and reading 120 PowerPoint slides. The whole thing could just die on the vine because somebody's decided that they want $5 million more than you wanted to pay. And that's just how it is. And then you get up and you continue with your life. You learn a lot. It's super fun. But like, you get up and you continue with your life. If the deal goes forward, though, the product leaders are often a big part of the integration story. How do the products integrate? How do we tell the story to the customers? How do we achieve that growth that we thought we could achieve? So product leaders are a huge, huge part of the integration story, particularly since engineering teams can often be split in software. It takes a long time to blend the engineering teams, but the product story comes together almost day one, right? Because you want that press release to say, these two things are better together because, right? So it's actually really fun.
Cassie, could you ground us a little bit? What are some of the products we're talking about in your company or other companies that you're familiar with? Give us some examples of product, incumbent product, and maybe a product that you might be buying.
Yeah, so maybe we can pick an example from the previous company. So we were a cloud storage company, and we have solution that is actually direct to customer. We have NPR ads going on where we are selling our cloud backups solution to the customer. And then the first big acquisition that we did was to actually enter into the enterprise space to sell our solutions, to sell backup solutions to the businesses, whether those are small and medium businesses or big corporations as well. So it's not always a new product that we are entering. Maybe we are entering into a new customer space that is going to be helpful through the acquisition.
So cloud storage, to be a product manager for that, and your acquisitions going on that might be additional products that could either fold in or be different products.
Exactly.
And the acquisitions come with their own product manager too, right? You could equally be bought, right? And for some of you, that is the goal, presumably, right?
And you said it really well about the timing. Like timing is always unpredictable. At my previous role, I remember coincidentally we would do acquisitions always during Christmas time. And there was a time when I was joking with my colleague that maybe we need to build a fort around us so that people don't show their anger towards us. But the only time we actually didn't do an acquisition during the Christmas break and did it in summer, and that was when I was getting married. So the timing is never perfect.
When we were acquired, it was also at Christmas.
That was also.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Is that a year calendar budgeting kind of?
No.
It was just a coincidence.
Evil circumstance that just comes up.
I mean, I think we would feel equally if it hit on any other regular milestone. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Let's see if we have any questions that we could talk about right now.
Yeah.
For sure. Let's get a mic.
I'm curious, you said you go into the diligence process, with your product expertise. Are you allowed to say maybe this isn't the greatest acquisition, or do you go into it with this is going to happen and I have to prepare for it?
That is an
Yeah.
excellent question. In an ideal world, which we don't live in, it is important to have truth and honesty in that situation, right? Because but you have to back it up. Right. You can say, I don't like this because the architecture of the technology is wrong, or because the customers are a different customer base, or I don't think we can sell in the way that they sell, and that would introduce risk into our world. Most of the time, though, correct me, tell me if you feel differently. Most of the time, it's not sort of yes or no on the product so much as if we do this to mitigate the problems, we would have to do A, B, C, and D. Right. And because there's so many different factors in whether or not it's a yes or a no. There's also the revenue. There's also there's just the financials of the organization. That what would you do? What is your alternative to buying this thing if you need to solve a problem in your technology stack? So the best way to frame your opposition or your concerns in a situation is not just nope, hard pass. I mean, we have had some hard pass moments, and that's been fun. But most of the time, it's in order to do this, we have to make sure that we don't cut their sales force because we don't have an analogous sales force inside our organization, or whatever the other caveats might be. That make sense?
Yep.
So I have one question. Let's say you acquire a small startup which have the similar product as of you, and you are the bigger organization. And so how do you make sure in your diligence that those two products might integrate properly in your organization, and how do you put forward in the press release that did you just to kill the competition you did it, or just to make your product stronger you did it?
Steve has got multiple startups in his integration path right now.
Yeah. So I think again, it depends. A lot of my answers are going to be it depends. But yeah, I think there are different value drivers that we can have through such an acquisition. It could be for a customer acquisition, or it could be that it's maybe an additional feature to our existing product. If it's a customer acquisition, then our integration plans would be very different, that we would like to have them move to our platform, our processes, our systems. Our product becomes the main product. But if it's a gap in our product that we were filling through that small startup or an acquisition, then what we will be building is the product team and the engineering team will be building bridges between the two products and how can we integrate the products together and what can be the customer solution, customer experience to use that. So I think, again, it depends why we acquired that startup, and the integration plan is going to be dependent on that.
So you use this idea of like a gap, identifying a gap, whether in your product or your company. And so could you speak to the evaluation process of deciding to acquire a new company to fill that gap versus trying to build that in-house versus trying to contract for that?
Yeah, that's a hard, evaluation is in general a little bit of an art. I know that you've taken finance classes that make it seem like a science. I'm going to tell you, there's different elements. Like if you're building it, obviously it's just going to take longer than something that already exists. And so if time to market is the primary barrier, you're going to want to buy something that's more intact. In software, there's actually a sort of a persistent third option of, is there an open source thing I can plug in as well, right? Which is often the third option. There's also the issue with building of expertise, right? If I wanted to augment my existing old product with AI, I might have to go hire some AI geniuses, which in itself is going to be both expensive and time consuming. And so you're thinking of time to market primarily in the build versus buy. But the other elements of that, like Haseeb has mentioned, sometimes you're buying something because there's an entrenched customer base and a good one that believes in that product. And so the startup cost of my homegrown thing versus something that already exists is going to be a factor. But valuation has so many different other components, right? For those of you who play in the startup space, and I did briefly, it was fun. You know, those are companies that if you're lucky, right, you've got good revenues, you almost never have profitability, right? And that is one kind of acquisition. You're buying growth. Typically, you're looking for high growth rates, and there's almost no profitability in a startup, right? Little bits. We tend to work in companies with wildly high profitability, just EBITDA margins that are extraordinary, right? And so we often value companies, right, based on profitability versus on growth, and which one has more weight. And am I interested in buying the growth trajectory of this organization, or am I interested in augmenting my profit in my bottom line? And those are those are sort of, I would say, tensing factors as well. And when you're looking at evaluation.
A little bit of a different topic here, but I was wondering, how are your acquisitions usually financed in your space, and to what extent are third parties like investment banks and professional service firms involved in the process?
Yeah, there are many firms involved usually, especially if there is a bigger acquisition. So I'll first start with the external support that we usually get. Like we'll have maybe a financial diligence company who could help with understanding the finances of the company and how they are being reported and what changes we would be making going forward. In other cases, there's a technology partner that you would have who is doing diligence with the internal company teams. So there are many people involved in externally that are involved in the process, and not just on the acquisition side, but also on the integration side as well. Once you have acquired the company and now you're integrating the two companies, you need that kind of support, who are subject matter experts in that field. In terms of financing the deal, in some cases you have a cash in your balance sheet and you're using a portion of that. But in many cases, there are banks involved, investment banks, that you are pitching that acquisition to them, and you are telling them the value driver, the value that is going to come out of that acquisition, and you basically get the debt to finance that deal.
Let's take a couple questions from the online audience. A couple people asked about your corp dev team. How do you measure your success? Is it simply, yes, the deal was done? Or are there other corp dev metrics? How well the acquisition integration goes? How it's working with the existing portfolio, or other metrics?
So certainly at the highest level, right, there's some metrics that say we'd like to do a certain amount of deals or add a certain amount of revenue to our business, right? That's probably a better way to think about it, because you can buy 5 small things or 1 big thing, right? And you kind of get to the same place. But the way that typically we look at is whether or not the acquisition met its business case. And that's not a within 6 months answer. That's typically 2 to 3 years out. your business case is based on two things that Haseeb alluded to them earlier. There's a set of cost synergies, which is a hypothesis that says if I buy this company and merge it with mine, I can save a certain amount of money on often basic things, HR and legal fees and office locations and things like that, but sometimes more complicated things. And then there's revenue synergies. If I buy this company, then we can make 1 + 1 will equals 3 in terms of the revenue. We will make more money together than we would have made apart. Those two things come together into the business case, the revenue synergies and the cost synergies, and you evaluate that over a couple years, because you're not going to achieve any of those within 6 months, or maybe a little bit. You'll be on the path, but a couple years later, you look at what did I promise to myself and to the debt providers and to my board and to the shareholders of my company, and how well did I do against that promise? And that is actually how corp dev gets evaluated more broadly.
A great question online, and it kind of might transition us into broader discussion of integration. But the question is, how does the acquisition target's culture fit into your decision process?
Sorry, it's just such a hard question.
Oh, it's a very hard question. In my personal experience, it was always a very big deal.
I'm gonna let you do that.
You were gonna let me do it. Okay. He was gonna hang me out to dry. Here's the thing. Culture has a lot of different factors, right? And some of those factors, I would say, drive the value of an organization. And some of them just, they don't, they're just different, right? So if you have a fun Silicon Valley culture coming together with a stodgy, I don't know, banking culture, you're going to have a feeling that you've got a cultural difference. But does that impact the value of that transaction? It adds complexity, but it probably doesn't change the valuation, right? There's other cultures that would change the valuation. If you had a culture where you were inviting a series of lawsuits, right, that would be maybe a problem, right, that we would want to be able to address up front. And there might be even a point at which you'd say, I can't be part of this, right? I can't be part of an organization that is creating this much agitation amongst either its employees or its customers, right? And so, but most of the time, culture is something to solve, to this lovely person's point, right? Culture is something you flag when it feels different, and you say, what are the things I'm going to do to mitigate that? And the best organizations proactively understand and assess and mitigate. It's so easy to let that ball drop. It is so easy. And it's actually so painful for the employees on both sides when that ball drops. It drives attrition. It drives a lot of value loss if you drop that ball. But honestly, it's so easy because it's so hard to quantify it and put it on a business case. It doesn't live there most of the time.
Let me dig a little bit more into that. Certainly, I heard you allude to the flagging of potentially toxic cultures, of course, right?
Sure.
That might even be a stop, right? But for cultures that are perceived perhaps or in reality are really, germane to that organization, and they feel blended together, and it's some kind of an ethos of their go-to-market strategy, perhaps. Do you think about, to your point, integrating them into your culture or learning from their culture, maybe absorbing some of it, and the metric might be employee retention in the acquired companies? Do you think like that?
Retention and finding the culture champions within the organization, the people that are critical to that integrated group, and saying, well, if these are the individuals that are holding this team together, and if we can speak to them about how to bring this together and create champions among them, right? But it's actually a really concerted effort. The thing I like, and I don't know if you feel this way, but increasingly it is a to-do item on the integration list.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that we put explicitly there, and we keep an eye on it. On our deals, it's often one of the value drivers of the deal is integrating the team successfully and mitigating the attrition and trying to maintain the strength of the organization that we've acquired. I don't know that it was on the list like that 20 years ago, right? I think it was just, you get bought, good luck, you're welcome, right? So I actually think that it's increasingly front of mind, which is good.
And one of the, we were talking about the success factors for a corp dev team, and I would say that this is one of the success factors of an acquisition. How efficiently have you been able to integrate the two companies, not just from a product perspective or systems perspective, but also employee experience and the culture? And there are just so many culture that could exist within the organization, maybe a geo-based, it may be a functional isolation that some teams may be working in. So all of that, I think studying that, surveying and understanding what the different cultures exist in an organization and then addressing those, I think is very key for any acquisition.
Excellent. Well, I hoped, and I think it did, this would lead us to maybe step back a little bit, but let's go deeper into integration, right? So integration of a new company, I mean, mundane things like payroll, like, insurance plans, to the products and the functionality and whatever else. What is on your integration checklist, and what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the success stories?
Yeah, maybe I can start since I'm recently going through one of the integration. I think we always sometimes think that integration starts after closing the deal, but I would say it starts much earlier than that. Even when there is even no target that exists, you are basically learning from the previous lessons and you are applying those lessons. You're building up a new plan that could work for the next acquisition whenever that comes. But apart from that, as soon as I think the acquisition conversations start and you are doing the diligence, there is a value in involving the integration teams who are going to be involved in integrating the two companies, listening to all those diligence conversations, because that's going to be helpful in developing an integration thesis. What is high level that we are going to be doing post acquisition? That stage I would call an integration assessment stage. The next one comes is more planning. So sometimes there is a gap between signing an acquisition to closing that. Like in a home buying process, you sign a deal and then there are a number of days in between where you are arranging mortgage and fulfilling certain other closing conditions. And then there is a closing date. So there is a time period in between where usually we do more of the integration planning. We sit with the other teams, each function talks to each other, understand what we do, how different processes work, what different systems exist, who are the resources that are involved. So understanding all of that and based on that, creating plans. And eventually we come up with a very solid project management kind of a plan where you know what the timelines are, what different milestones are going to be, who is going to own what different aspects of integration. So that's the integration planning stage. And then the third one is the integration implementation. Now the actual work starts. You are basically implementing the plans that you have created as an organization. So your different teams are involved in integrating the two companies, finance, talking to finance, and in developing those processes and everything. So I think that's overall the three stages that I would highlight. But in terms of, I would say one more thing in terms of the skills. I think it's very important for anyone who's involved in the integration to rise above the functional boundaries. Because sometimes we have those functional boundaries and we have subject matter experts in each field. Payroll person knows how payroll works, but we just are not connecting the dots. How other integration activities are happening. So it's very important to rise above that functional boundaries and look from a high angle, from a top-down view, and understand how different pieces of puzzle are going to work together. Related to that, I think I will give one example. Think of an airline industry where there are the security and the maintenance of aircraft is just almost 100%. That thankfully very rarely accidents happen. But if you think of your airport experience, almost every other flight is getting delayed. You are stuck in long lines. So where you have achieved almost 100% efficiency in one part of the business, you have actually so many gaps and errors and failures in other part of the organization. So the good integration would be where you have actually looked at all different pieces of it and work together in a way that it's a smooth experience for employees, for customers, for our systems and processes and all of it.
I think I heard you mention this, but like, where are the digital product managers in that sequence? All of it?
Those that handle the customer interactions on the websites and so forth. I'm sorry, that title is new to me.
Where are the product managers? Where?
Yeah, I mean, sort of everything, but product management tends to sit with the question of, I've bought a product. Now, how am I going to go to market with this thing? And how am I going to integrate it with what I have? It's a roadmap and go to market discussion, right? And I love that part of the problem, having been in product management and product marketing for so long, right? The positioning of new products inside a portfolio is fascinating to me, right? And I'd love to spend time with it. In some ways, that's the obvious part of integration, right? That's the part that we see when we read the Harvard Business School case on acquisitions. And actually the iceberg has got underneath it, multiple Salesforce type CRM systems and multiple HR systems, and rationalizing the benefits that you give to your employees in Romania or Spain or Guam. And just the iceberg is real big underneath the surface. And so I would say that the product management piece, honestly, is the fun and most obvious part of an integration experience, and the one that gets a lot of attention. I mean, it's truly fascinating. And then, the rest of us spend our time trying to make sure that people are getting paid in Lithuania, and making sure that, our InfoSec rules are completely applied across all laptops that have been acquired or not, right? Like, these are critical parts of the integration story. I think the thing that Haseeb said was right, though. Like, it might not seem as fun, but it's actually an end-to-end view of the business. We talk about something that a dear friend of ours called cookies to cash. And that starts with the website cookie that tags you the minute you walk into the front door, and all the way to the point that you've actually purchased and paid for the product. And that process touches dozens of systems and hundreds of employees. That's everybody from the person building the website to the person cashing the check or accepting the credit card transaction, end to end, hundreds and hundreds of employees. This is a position, the integration job is one of seeing the full picture, because any handoff in that relay race and you haven't done your job.
Cookies to cash. Love it. Any other questions in the audience? Yes.
I really like the parallel that you discussed with the airline industry about how different parts of integration between different companies, there's like finance and marketing, everything. Could you talk a little bit about if the company that someone is acquiring can necessarily have like a not so developed aspect of it, and how you integrate that into your own company?
Yeah, I think again, it depends. But I would say that there are different processes that may not be perfect or may not be working in an integrated organization. We talk about M&A as merger and acquisition, but in most cases, there's one large company acquiring another small company. So you kind of, in a large company, you have a platform. You already have certain processes and certain systems that are used, like Lilac was mentioning, there is an HR system, there is a customer resource management system that we have already developed as a large organization. So it's easy for a small acquisition that you are basically onboarding their systems, their processes, and their resources onto something that you already have developed. And in cases where, let's assume there is not a very defined process with an acquired company, it just becomes, I would say, even easier because now we are transitioning to our process, our system, so we can just onboard them and have them adopt that. It becomes more complex when there is an acquisition of maybe a similar size companies, because in that case, you are actually deciding what is best of the two systems, what is the best of the two processes. And you kind of, your initial assessment period and planning period is mostly spent on what's the best looks, what does the future looks like, what are we going to be adopting. Maybe it's one of the two, or maybe it's the third process, the third system that we are going to introduce, because the two companies being integrated together are more scale bigger than what it was before. So I think the size of the acquisition matters in terms of making those decisions.
Yeah.
I also liked the metaphor as well. And related to her question, I was wondering, like, what other big challenges come up frequently in acquisitions?
Big challenges. There's so many. I think the systems challenges are huge and can't be minimized, right? If a large company, I think the piece that's, maybe if I were to abstract that, the step back is, if you are a company that's existed for 15 or 20 years, you have a set way of doing things. And that way of doing things is probably a curious dance of IT systems and the fact that Donna knows that she has to ping Sven on Fridays before payroll in order to make sure that the team in Wisconsin gets what they need, right? And those kinds of sort of implied processes and behaviors complicate almost every part of an integration. And so if you have most of the problem statements don't come out on, you know, how do I input data from one system and move it to another system? Most of them are in all the house rules, right? It's like driving in Boston. You know that you're allowed to make a left turn and the first 3 cars will go through as soon as the light turned green. And then after that, right? We all operate by house rules if you're driving in Boston, and we know them and we appreciate and understand them. But those house rules exist in every function in every company, and they're not documented. And they often are with your most tenured employees that are almost doing it naturally as the air they breathe. And so all of the hiccups feel to me like they're coming up from us trying to quantify and document a whole bunch of really ephemeral things that make a company go. And culture is part of that, and people are part of that, and systems are part of that. And so one of the efforts that we do in diligence and in integration planning is just honestly keep your eyes open and your ears real open for these pieces that remind you, oh shoot, we've got to follow up on this because that's an exception that they just sort of mentioned in passing, which might blow up a whole thing if we don't chase it down, right? Those feel like the pitfalls, because we always present the best version of ourselves. I'm a logical organization that does things in order, and I have systems and plans, and every quarter we do.
So I could follow up on that. So we spend time in some of the courses we have here talking about user journey maps. I mean, real due diligence in terms of user requirements and requirements analysis from, you know, you might call it even an ethnographic perspective, getting deep into, you know, the person who has to call Sven to get the payroll done. It would not show up on a system architecture map, right?
No.
Or data flow map.
That's right.
So how do you do that?
And you talk to a lot of people for a long time.
Is that the product manager's job?
It's often integration, right? I mean, for the user and the customer buying process, it could be a product manager that gets involved in that, right? If you're saying, how does the customer come to buy an add-on or a plugin, or why are they buying 10 more licenses? That's a product manager's job. If it's how does payroll happen, that's an integration person listening for days and weeks and
being really good at details and looking for the edge cases.
it's kind of fun though.
Yeah. Yeah, question.
Hello, I'm Rishabh. So my question is, after acquisition, integration starts, and between integration of 2 companies, it starts after acquisition. So in your experience, have been any scenario where after acquisition, integration was not efficient and it made like it took some losses, or is it irreversible, like any process forward with your experience?
Yeah, I think there have been many cases where the integration wasn't as successful as we wanted it to be. But I think it's
Before you.
Obviously, we had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I would say that how you define integration is also very important. Like why it was not successful, you need to understand what we wanted to achieve with that.
Some loopholes, like you might be thinking on entering a new market, and because of that you have integrated with a company or something like that, and later you realize that this is not working out and we are not able to capture the newer market.
Yeah.
That's not fun. It does happen. I'm thinking of
I-
one. I'm thinking of one. You're thinking of
But
one.
the same one.
And we're not going to say a whole lot more about that, but what I'm going to say is that sometimes, for example, you discover that you've done all the work to try to understand what a product can do for customers. And then once you have it, you feel like maybe it wasn't a full understanding of what the product could do. And then you have to make a really tough decision, right? And you bend and contort to try to find other ways to have made this not bad, right? How is this not a failure? And sometimes there's just nothing to be done but cut your losses and say, you know, this was a mistake, right? That's an extreme case, and it's fun to talk about over beers. But most of the cases live somewhere in the middle, where somebody set some expectations around what integration would look like or what revenue growth would look like. And it turns out that it fell short or took longer, or we didn't anticipate this giant bugaboo in the middle of it. Like it's usually lives in the middle of the extremes. Those middle cases aren't as fun to talk about. They're just kind of little life happens.
And quite frequently, what we learn during diligence or during the acquisition process, we learn a lot more in integration. And sometimes the learnings that we had in the acquisition were very different from what you learn in integration, because now you are actually deeply involved and you know that, okay, that's not what I thought, how it works. But yeah.
And you get to more people, right? Like once the deal is done, all of a sudden it's yours. You can start talking to everybody. Nobody gets involved until the deal is signed. They let 10 or 15 people in to talk to, right? Because you don't want to go into a company and start talking to everybody if the deal doesn't happen. That's weird, right? And so you constrain the group of people that are involved in the acquisition, and those people are either both motivated to make it work, and so they're going to put their best foot forward, which often means glossing over some of the more interesting pieces of the company. But also, like, honestly, they're just not in there with Donna and Sven getting payroll done, right? And so they often just don't know because they're more senior level individuals, right? And so it's not necessarily malice so much as just access and time, that over time you learn more because you have greater access and greater time.
One question there.
So if you're acquiring a professional services company, so you're really acquiring people, not a product, how do you hedge that risk of them just going, no, I'm leaving. I'm going to take my accounts and I'm going. So you just bought a name. Do you discount that? How do you discount that?
I love that he brought up the Emily in Paris use case. No, not seen that one.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, so the whole plot of Emily in Paris is we acquired a professional services company, and then they all took their clients and left. You know, we rarely do. Like we're in the software acquisition business, so we tend to look for software. There's a lot of retention and, you know, like incentives that you put in place for an organization, and you want to keep the right leaders and the right people that hold the culture together and stuff. But it's a much trickier process to acquire humans because humans can vote with their feet.
But tie-up contracts or earnouts or things like that would be.
Yeah, you do different kinds of retention contracts, and that happens in almost every acquisition. You think about retention for the critical key employees for some period of time. And often then you don't just take that for granted. Then you want to culturally sort of embrace them and bring them in so that they want to stay beyond the retention period as well.
Oh, sorry.
So this is I'll do my best to make the question clear. So the basic question is, how do you make decisions and how do you measure success? And what I'm hearing is, you know, you might be buying the team, you know, the Lithuanian AI team because you have a gap in your team. You might be buying a business because, you know, it's going to increment your ability to sell, or it's going to add, or has the right customer base, or you might be entering an adjacency, and you don't really know whether it's successful until several years later, and you have to make the best decision that you can at the time, and still, you know, afford yourself a little bit of wiggle room. Maybe you're trying to do a deal in March, and you know something's going to come in December. How are you making decisions? How are you choosing the right thing and knowing, and how are you measuring that you've done the right thing?
I think you set up certain criteria for success. Like, I think that's where you were going towards as well. I will give an example of an employee experience integration. So we are thinking about the payroll and how the new employees are going to come to our ACM system and things like that. And there were a few criteria that we set up. We said, okay, the employee experience should be smooth. If they are moving from one payroll system to another payroll system, that should be an easier transition for them. It should be scalable, because we're not just talking about few employees, but it's going to be maybe few employees now, but later on they are going to be much bigger organization that we may be acquiring. So how scalable is that? And then from a technical perspective, our processes and our systems, are they going to support it or not? So we kind of, like, I'm just talking about ACM integration, and I'm putting different criteria for my success, that it should be employee experience driven, it should be systems and that are able to support, another criteria that we can set up for that. And whatever different decisions or options you are looking at, I think that should pass that test. And there can be many ways to integrate in an ACM system or an employee organization. But you match all of those options with the criteria that you have set up and say, okay, yes, this seems to be the best because it passes all of our tests that we have laid out for us. That would be one way I would say of measuring success.
That's when we've taken the time to step back and say in different elements of integration, what are the criteria of success for all of these different ones? And that helps drive some of the choices. If you're asking about the overall acquisition decision, that is much more nuanced in that a lot of humans are involved in that, right? The leadership of the company is involved in that. The organization or business unit or part of the company that's going to be adopting the acquisition, the sales leaders that are going to be responsible for the additional revenue, the board of the company, the debt investors that need to finance the whole thing. If they're not going to buy in on it and it's big, you don't have the money to shop, right? And I think one of the things that's in some ways it's an easier problem in a vacuum. If you think about all the things I could do and whenever I could do them, you can come up with what you feel is the ideal set of next steps and decisions. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in an imperfect universe where acquisitions are available in Q1, but not in Q3, or in, and companies that you like might come up for purchase at the same time and you can only buy one, right? There's all these, the reality bears down heavily against the decisions. And makes it really complicated, honestly. So there's a lot of stakeholdering, there's a lot of discussion, hours and days of discussions with smart people, both inside the organization and outside the organization, bankers and consultants and like all sorts of folks, right, get involved in this. So I would say that no single human actually is responsible for the decision almost ever, right? It's a collective group of people, and the negotiating and the discussions sort of move like tides across the room until an answer is achieved.
Great. So we have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we get to another topic. We have several questions coming in on career path. And how do I get started? Any questions like what are the roles in M&A? What types of companies have these types of functions? I'm just going to kind of rattle off the cumulative question here. What skills are important? How do I start to learn? And I love this question. In hindsight, are there roles each of you that you wish you would have had to better prepare you for your current role? Maybe we start with that, and we'll back up into how does everybody prepare academically and work experience wise to enter into this exciting field?
Yeah. Maybe I can talk about my experience, how I actually entered into this domain. And I was basically doing project management for an R&D lab organization. And I had done project management before in my engineering days, before I did my MBA. So I got the opportunity to actually get involved as a project manager in an M&A team. I think I had some understanding of financials and good with math and was organized enough to work with cross-functional teams and understand how their processes work. And I was good with Excel as well.
Oh yeah.
So I think those were all the things that maybe my boss at that time was looking for in an M&A role. But I started as a project manager. But I learned all of these things on the job. And funny enough, I was actually on my first day going through HR and IT onboarding. And my manager at that time came in and he said, okay, we are going to West Coast to do a diligence for a company. And I said, when? And he said, this evening. So basically my M&A journey started on a JetBlue airplane flight. But I guess throughout that experience, when you are getting involved, when you are learning and talking to different companies, you get that kind of experience. And we were again able to close that deal within the first month of joining. And I think in that 1 month there was a really big learning curve. Yeah, crash course.
Ready to get on that plane.
Yeah, exactly. And then the integration started. And I remember I got a call from the other side, and there was a guy who was telling me about what integration and TSA plans that we are going to be making. TSA is basically a transitionary services agreement between the two companies. And I said, okay, I'll give you a call back. And I rushed to my manager's office and I said, okay, what are we going to do? And he said, oh, I was actually avoiding that conversation because it's messy. He took a piece of A4 paper out of his printer, which he usually used to do when there are complex problems to solve. And then he started drawing and documenting a few things on an A4 paper. And I only had Post-it notes in my hand. So I was copying all of that information on that. But basically that was the journey. And I carried that Post-it notes for the first year of my job. And I think I was probably known as an integration guy with a Post-it.
Sharp project management skills, sort of timely, right place, right time. I hope it's the right place.
Yeah.
And kind of growing into it. Right?
Yeah.
Well, was this a goal for you, or did you study for it?
There's a running joke amongst everyone that I always wanted an M&A job, and I left business school wanting an M&A job, and it is really freaking hard. All the M&A jobs you're going to find are banking jobs right out of school. Like that's the vast majority. And sometimes people spend a couple years in banking. I did not have that in my soul or heart. And so I sort of just let it go, honestly, and went into a product marketing path and applied for M&A roles along the way multiple times. Good stories for beers. And but ended up in product marketing and ended up leading product marketing and being a VP of product marketing at Carbonite when we were together. I ended up, it isn't sort of closed off to you if you don't do it right out the gate, right? The pieces I didn't do was I'm actually not nearly as good at Excel. I'm not good at building the model of the business case for an acquisition. That's just not, building it I can't do. I can read it and tell you where it's wrong, but I'm not going to build it. I'm just not as facile with the financial components of M&A. What I did learn from years of product management and product marketing was the go-to-market side of business. Right. And that's the strength that I bring to the role and to the strategy of it, is looking at a company and saying, can we or can we not do better together with these two entities coming together from a go-to-market and product positioning perspective. So I think the thing with M&A that's actually worth remembering is that you can come at it from multiple directions. You sometimes meet people who've grown up in M&A and all they can do is run the numbers for you. And they're never going to tell you about the strategy, and they're happy and they're successful. And then you meet other people that are focused on the product and the strategy and the meaning or the reasons behind it. And they might have excellent people on their teams that are running the numbers. And then you meet other people who lead integrations better than anybody that you can imagine. But are they the deal makers? They are typically not. And the key is that everybody's coming with with an expertise and an understanding of the business and what it takes to bring together two organizations, right? And there's so many different aspects of that there's actually many different routes to success. I will say this. And I'm pretty sure all our favorite M&A people would say this, is that everybody wants in on this. Like everybody, until you're part of the payroll integration team who didn't want no part of it. All the product leaders, everyone's like, tell me about it. What's happening? What's going on? It's the coolest secret in an organization. You are one of, like, everybody around you wants in on this. And you have to find a way to add value in order to be included, right? Being an onlooker doesn't buy anybody anything. And in fact, it compromises the confidentiality of the process. So what are you doing to add value to the process is the question you sort of ask yourself as you approach an M&A situation. And if you can think of the ways that you're adding value and consistently deliver, the world will probably welcome your participation.
Well, on that note, what a fantastic summary of what is necessary for product managers to really think beyond their product, right? Think about the company, think about the strategy, think about adding value to your company, right? Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you both. Really appreciate a fantastic conversation. Thank you online. Thank you in person. Have a great day.